The setting sun of Lagos painted the glass towers of Victoria Island in blazing orange, cruelly contrasting with the slums, stretching in the distance like a sea of corrugated zinc. Kwame Asante, 28 years old, sat on the scorching pavement outside the Echo Atlantic Hotel, his hand extended toward hurried passers-by. His worn clothes couldn't mask his natural bearing, and his dark gaze carried a determination that the streets hadn't managed to break. Around him, Lagos pulsed with its 1,000 lives, the relentless honking of yellow Danfo buses, the Afrobeat music spilling from shops, the shouts of Akara vendors, and the spicy aroma of grilled suya floating through the humid air. His fingers absently caressed the Akan pendant hanging from his neck, the sole remnant of a past he refused to forget. Suddenly, the images returned. They always came without warning, like shards of glass piercing his memory. The car bursting into flames beneath Abuja's black sky. The sirens wailing, his parents, Samuel and Grace Asante, brilliant architects, burning with their secrets. Him, a 17-year-old boy, weeping on the knees of a compassionate police officer. And that phrase he'd heard, whispered, "They knew something they shouldn't have known." Kwame shook his head to chase away the ghosts. 5 years on the streets had taught him to keep the past in its place. A sudden commotion brought him back to the present. Richard Okafor, 45 years old, burst through the hotel's golden doors like a tornado in an Italian suit. His Rolex gleamed under the neon lights, and his phone pressed to his ear trembled in his clenched hand. Kwame immediately recognized Lagos's most feared man, perfectly coiffed graying hair, steel gaze that knew no forgiveness, a presence that crushed everything in its path. "What do you mean it's collapsing?" Okafor shouted into his phone. "I invested 2 billion naira in that complex. Are you engineers or idiots?" His voice carried to the sidewalk where Kwame held out his hand. Curious onlookers stopped, drawn by the unusual spectacle of the all-powerful Richard Okafor losing his composure in public. "The foundations are giving way, sir," crackled the voice through the speaker. "We don't understand. The calculations were correct." "Correct?" Okafor yanked the phone from his ear as if wanting to smash it. "3 families are in the hospital. If anyone dies, your career dies with them." The billionaire paced the sidewalk, his fury radiating like a toxic aura. His bodyguards kept a respectful distance, aware that nothing could soothe their boss's rage when his business faltered. "Sir," the trembling voice continued on the phone, "we need more time to identify the problem." "Time?" Okafor erupted in joyless laughter. "The media's already on it. My reputation. I can fix it." Kwame's voice rose, clear and calm in the chaos. Okafor froze instantly, his furious eyes settling on the beggar sitting a few meters away. Passers-by stopped, stunned to see someone dare interrupt the formidable businessman. "What did you say?" Okafor hissed, approaching, his contemptuous gaze sweeping over Kwame's rags. Kwame rose slowly, his hand instinctively gripping his Akan pendant. He'd acted out of pure compassion. The idea that innocent families might die in a collapse revolted him more than his own misery. "I said I can fix your structural problem," he repeated in a firm voice. Okafor looked him up and down with a mixture of anger and disbelief. "You're nothing but a filthy beggar. How dare you?" "But I see what your experts don't see," Kwame interrupted. "Your complex is collapsing because you used unwashed marine sand in your concrete. The salt corrodes the metal reinforcement, and differential compression creates cascading fractures. That's why it starts from the lower floors." Silence fell like a lead blanket. Okafor's eyes widened, his phone dangling limply in his hand. Around them, onlookers held their breath. How could this homeless man know details that his graduate engineers hadn't identified? Kwame continued, his voice carrying an authority his clothes contradicted. "If you don't treat the problem at its source and reinforce the load-bearing beams within 48 hours, the entire structure will collapse, and this time there will be deaths." Okafor stared at this beggar who just diagnosed in 2 minutes what his engineers had been searching for weeks. In the dark gaze of the man before him, he glimpsed an intelligence that deeply troubled him. His ruthless businessman's instinct whispered that something important was happening. something that could change everything. "Who are you, really?" he murmured, his anger giving way to consuming curiosity. But Kwame had already turned away, disappearing into Lagos's colorful crowd, leaving behind a disconcerted billionaire and 1,000 unanswered questions. Okafor stared long at this beggar who just diagnosed in 2 minutes what his engineers had been searching for weeks. Who was this man, really? Dawn broke over Mushin in a symphony of familiar sound. Kwame opened his eyes in his corrugated zinc shack, awakened by the joyful cries of children already running between the stalls and the rhythmic pounding of yam pestles. The morning air carried 1,000 scents: hot palm oil, burning incense, damp earth after the night's dew. Through the cracks in his metal partition, he spotted Mama Kemi already setting up her vegetable stand. This 50-year-old woman with a generous smile and hands calloused from work had become his surrogate family for 3 years. Her grey hair was always perfectly braided, and her colourful boo-boos brightened the poorest street corner in the neighbourhood. "Kwame, my son," she called to him in Yoruba. "Come get your tea." He emerged from his makeshift shelter, barefoot on the packed earth. Mama Kemi handed him a steaming cup of ginger tea, her kind eyes scrutinizing his tired face. "Did you dream about your parents again?" she asked gently. Kwame nodded silently, inhaling the spicy aroma warming his hands. Around them, Mushin came alive. Akara vendors set up their basins of boiling oil, King Sunny Ade's high-life music escaped from a crackling radio, and women balanced calabashes on their heads, heading toward the central market. "Today is different," he murmured. "I might have a chance to..." "A chance for what, my son?" Kwame squeezed his Akan pendant between his fingers. "To discover the truth." 2 hours later, a motorcycle taxi dropped Kwame off in front of the Victoria Island construction site. The contrast struck him like a slap. Here, black Mercedes mingled with armored SUVs, 3-piece suits replaced colorful boo-boo, and office air conditioning contrasted with the humid heat of working-class neighborhoods. Okafor waited for him, surrounded by a swarm of engineers in yellow hard hats and foremen with hard gazes. His smile was that of a predator, amusing itself with its prey. "Here's our special consultant," he announced with palpable contempt. "Mr. Beggar is going to explain our profession to us." Cruel, humiliating laughter erupted. Kwame absorbed it without flinching, accustomed to contemptuous looks. But a voice rose, clear and firm. "Papa, at least give him a chance to speak." All eyes turned to Aduni Okafor, advancing with her architect's plans under her arm. At 26, she gracefully wore a hijab with multicolored wax patterns, framing a face of striking natural beauty. Her hazel eyes shone with keen intelligence, but Kwame also detected deep concern, as if she carried an invisible burden. "My adopted daughter," Okafor specified with a hint of possessive pride. "Aduni, architecture graduate from the University of Lagos. She supervises the technical part of the project." Aduni greeted Kwame with a respectful nod that contrasted with the ambient hostility. The Nigerian workers observed them with suspicion. How dare this homeless man meddle in their affairs? "Show me your plans," Kwame simply requested. Okafor snapped his fingers, and an engineer unrolled the blueprints on a construction table. Kwame approached, his movements suddenly precise and professional. His hands, calloused from the streets but skillful, traced invisible lines on the technical paper. "There," he said, pointing to a section. "Your calculation error on the load-bearing capacity. And here, you didn't account for differential settlement of the lagoon soil." Heavy silence fell. Aduni leaned over the plans, her expert gaze verifying each detail mentioned by Kwame. Slowly, her brows furrowed. He's right," she murmured, astonished. "How did you see that?" Okafor, who'd expected to publicly humiliate this presumptuous beggar, felt anger rising. Instead of ridicule, Kwame was earning recognition from credentialed experts. "Enough!" he barked. "You'll work as a laborer, on your knees in the mud. I want to see you crawl." The workers snickered, relieved to see the social order restored. But when Kwame knelt without protest to examine more closely the cracked foundations, Aduni felt deep unease. She observed this strange man who wielded engineering concepts with the mastery of a graduate while accepting humiliation with troubling dignity. Discreetly, she approached and handed him a bottle of cold water. "Thank you," Kwame murmured, their eyes meeting for a fraction of a second. In Aduni's eyes, he read a silent question. "Who are you, really?" In Kwame's, she glimpsed ancient pain and unwavering determination. That evening, in his luxurious office overlooking Lagos Lagoon, Okafor made a discreet call to his private investigator. "I want to know everything about this beggar. Absolutely everything." Night had fallen over Mushin, stifling and noisy as always. Kwame sat facing Mama Kemi in front of her shack, the flickering candlelight carving shadows on their faces. She'd prepared jollof rice for him, and the smell of spices mingled with incense smoke rising from the nearby temple. "You've carried this weight too long, my son," she murmured, scrutinizing his drawn features. "Tell me what's really eating at you." Kwame squeezed his Akan pendant between his trembling fingers. 5 years of silence weighed on his chest like a tombstone. He raised his eyes to Mama Kemi, this woman who'd taken him in without questions, fed him without conditions, loved him unconditionally. "My parents didn't die in an accident," he released in a broken voice. The words then gushed out like a breaking dam. He told everything. Samuel and Grace Asante, brilliant architects based in Abuja, specializing in earthquake-resistant construction. Their discovery of Okafor's fraudulent practices, untreated marine sand, substandard reinforcement, adulterated concrete. Their secret investigation, their meticulously gathered evidence. Papa had documented everything, Kwame continued, tears flowing freely down his cheeks. Photos, analyses, testimonies from workers. They were going to reveal everything to the Punch newspaper, but Okafor found out. His voice broke. In his memory returned images he'd repressed. The family car exploding on Abuja's highway, orange flames in the night, charred bodies identifiable only by their jewelry. The police ruled it an accident, mechanical failure, they said. But I'd stayed in Lagos with my grandmother. She revealed everything to me before she died. Papa had hidden the evidence in this pendant. With a slow gesture, Kwame unscrewed the base of the Akan jewelry. A tiny USB key appeared, no larger than a fingernail. 5 years I've carried the truth against my chest, he murmured. 5 years I've waited for my chance. Mama Kemi extended her calloused hands toward his. And today, that chance has arrived. Yes. Seeing his constructions collapse, I couldn't let innocent people die, even if it meant getting close to my parents' murderer. You're not alone anymore, Kwame. I'm with you. The next evening, the construction site was deserted. The setting sun set the metal cranes and unfinished buildings ablaze in golden light. Kwame knelt on the still warm concrete, redrawing the flawed plans with colored chalks he'd bought at the market. But this time, something had changed. To the pure technical lines, he mixed traditional Yoruba motifs, sacred spirals, fertility symbols, geometric patterns evoking his grandmother's Gelede masks. It's magnificent. Aduni's voice startled him. She stood in the shadow of a beam, her wax hijab floating in the evening breeze. She approached slowly, fascinated by these drawings transforming architectural plans into artwork. Why mix tradition and modernity? She asked, kneeling beside him. Kwame looked up at her. In the golden sunset light, Aduni was strikingly beautiful, but it was her gaze, intelligent, kind, curious, that moved him most. Because our roots are our strongest foundations, he replied softly. A building without soul collapses, like your father's constructions. Aduni reached toward one of the Akan spirals. Their fingers brushed on the colored chalk, and gentle electricity coursed through their bodies. Neither withdrew their hand. I've always dreamed of architecture that honors our heritage, she confessed. But Papa says that's romanticism, that only profit matters. And what do you think? I think you're right. We can't build the future by denying the past. They remained thus, their hands nearly joined on the colored drawings, sharing their broken dreams and reviving hopes. The muezzin's call to prayer echoed in the distance, mixed with the dull tam-tam rising from the Surulere neighborhood. "You're not really a beggar, are you?" Aduni murmured. "We're all beggars for something," Kwame evaded. "Me, I beg for justice." In the shadow of a container, a man in a dark suit took photos with his phone. Okafor had ordered discreet surveillance of this overly intelligent beggar. Seeing his adopted daughter so close to this stranger, possessive jealousy twisted his stomach. Aduni was his most precious possession, his living trophy. No one could take her from him. Back in his office, he paced like a caged beast when his phone rang. "Mr. Okafor," his private investigator's voice was grave, worried. "You need to know this beggar. His name is Kwame Asante, and his parents were..." Okafor's office was plunged in darkness when Aduni discreetly entered. She'd waited for her adoptive father to leave for his weekly business dinner at the Lagos Country Club. For 3 days, growing unease had gnawed at her. Kwame's strange looks, his inexplicable knowledge, her father's unusual agitation. Something was wrong. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened the locked drawers whose combination she'd known since adolescence. At the bottom of the third, under a pile of real estate contracts, she discovered a file marked "Personal, Confidential." Her blood ran cold discovering the contents. Photos of car accidents on Abuja Highway, macabre shots of charred vehicles, unrecognizable bodies. A list of names carefully crossed out in red marker. Samuel Asante, Grace Asante, handled. In the margin, a handwritten note from her father. Too curious, neutralized. The following pages revealed a meticulous system: bribes paid to building inspectors, falsified invoices for substandard materials, testimonies from workers convinced to stay silent. And everywhere, that same brutal signature, handled. Aduni collapsed in the leather armchair, documents scattered on her lap. The man who'd taken her in as an orphan, who'd raised her like his own daughter, who'd paid for her architecture studies, was a murderer. Asante. That name echoed painfully in her head. Kwame Asante, the beggar who wasn't one. The son of those murdered architects returning 15 years later to claim his vengeance. 20 kilometers away, in his Spartan Victoria Island apartment, Okafor violently hung up his phone. The investigator had just confirmed his worst fears. Kwame Asante, son of Samuel and Grace Asante, architects specializing in earthquake-resistant construction, deceased in a car accident on Abuja Highway in 2010. The son was 17 at the time. Memories returned with chilling clarity. Samuel Asante, that idealist who wanted to publicly reveal the construction industry's practices. His wife Grace, equally determined, who'd gathered damning evidence. Okafor remembered perfectly the day he'd given the fatal order. A car accident, he'd specified to his henchmen. Nothing suspicious. But had they recovered all the evidence? Had the kid inherited something? Anguish twisted his stomach. If Kwame possessed compromising documents, "That little bastard's playing with me," he growled. "He's getting close to Aduni to get to me." Jealousy added to fear. His adopted daughter was his most precious possession, his personal trophy. The idea that she might be seduced by his victim's son was unbearable. He picked up his phone and dialed a number he hadn't used in years. "I have a problem to handle," discreetly. That same evening, Freedom Park buzzed with Lagos Island's nightlife. Couples in love, families strolling, street vendors created a warm atmosphere under the illuminated palms. Aduni walked slowly beside Kwame, her hijab floating in the marine breeze rising from the lagoon. "Tell me your story," she said softly, "the real one." Chatu Kwame stopped near a fountain where children threw coins making wishes. The lamplight reflected in his dark eyes, creating moving shadows on his face. "What makes you think there's another one?" "Your way of looking at my father, as if you'd known him for a long time, and your hands, these aren't the hands of a man who's only known the streets." Aduni took his palms between hers, caressing the calluses that 5 years of begging had created, but also the subtler traces of intellectual work. indelible ink on the index finger, the particular callus of a draftsman on the middle finger. "I was adopted when I was 8, she confessed. "My biological parents died in a fire in Kano. Papa saved me, raised me, loved me, but sometimes," her voice broke, "sometimes I feel like he's hiding something from me." Kwame felt his heart tear. This woman he was learning to love was his tormentor's daughter, but she was just another victim, manipulated by a monster posing as a savior. "Secrets can destroy or liberate," he murmured. A stronger breeze slipped Aduni's hijab, revealing her hair braided with golden beads. With infinitely tender gesture, Kwame readjusted the fabric, his fingers brushing her cheek. Their faces were only centimeters apart. "I don't want you to get hurt," she whispered, "and I don't want to be the one who hurts you." They looked at each other long, both aware they were tipping into something irreversible. Nascent love between a man thirsting for vengeance and the innocent daughter of his mortal enemy. At the other end of Lagos, 3 men in dark suits received a photo and an address. "Make it look like an accident," ordered the voice on the phone. Midnight struck at Lagos Island's bell towers when Kwame entered the deserted construction site. Security floodlights created cones of blinding light, cutting the darkness into threatening shadow zones. He'd received a message: "Meet me at the site, alone. Lives depend on it." He knew it was a trap, but 5 years of waiting were coming to an end. Footsteps echoed on concrete. Okafor emerged from shadow, flanked by 3 men in dark suits. Under the harsh floodlight, the billionaire's face had lost all trace of humanity. Only the predator's calculating coldness remained. "I know who you are, Kwame Asante." The name cracked like a whip in the night air. Kwame didn't flinch, his hand instinctively gripping his Akan pendant. "Son of Samuel and Grace Asante, those idealistic architects who meddled in what didn't concern them." Okafor continued, slowly approaching. "You thought you could play with me, deceive me with your airs of repentant beggar?" "I'm not playing," Kwame replied in a firm voice. "I'm seeking justice." Okafor burst into icy laughter. "Justice? You mean your parents who snooped in my business? Who photographed my sites, questioned my workers, collected evidence against me? Your parents were too curious for their own good," he spat. "They were going to destroy everything I'd built with their grand moral principles." Kwame felt rage rising in him, pure and burning. "They died so families wouldn't die in your rotten buildings, so children wouldn't be crushed by your shoddy constructions." "So what?" Okafor shrugged with revolting indifference. "Business is business. You can't make an omelet without breaking eggs." The brutality of this confession took Kwame's breath away. Before him stood a man who'd ordered his parents' deaths with the same casualness he'd order his morning coffee. "But the problem," Okafor continued, signaling his men to approach, "is that the son survived, and he's starting to seduce my daughter." "Aduni's just another pawn in your game, isn't she?" Kwame shot back. "A respectable facade to mask your crimes." "Aduni is mine!" Okafor roared, suddenly losing his calm. "I saved her, raised her, shaped her. No one will take her from me, especially not my victim's son." The 3 henchmen drew their weapons. In seconds, Kwame would join his parents in death. "Papa, stop!" Aduni's voice tore through the night. She burst from behind a concrete mixer, breathless, eyes bright with tears. She'd heard everything, every word, every confession, every monstrous justification. "Aduni!" Okafor stammered, thrown off. "What are you doing here?" "I know everything," she sobbed. "Your hidden files, accident photos, crossed-out names. Samuel and Grace Asante. You killed his parents." Aduni's world crumbled. The man who'd raised her, cherished her, protected her, was a murderer. 15 years of filial love transformed into bitter ashes. "Sweetheart, you don't understand," Okafor tried in a pleading voice. "Everything I did was to protect us, to—" "Shut up!" she screamed. "Never lie to me again!" In an unpredictable movement, she threw herself at one of the killers, knocking his weapon down. In the confusion that followed, Kwame lunged at Okafor, and they rolled on the ground in desperate hand-to-hand combat. "Run, Kwame!" Aduni shouted, grabbing his hand. "Quick!" They dashed into Victoria Island's dark streets, pursued by Okafor's enraged shouts and his henchmen's gunshots. Their footsteps echoed on wet asphalt, mixed with distant sirens and Lagos's incessant nighttime hum. In a narrow alley, breathless, they finally stopped. Aduni collapsed against a wall, shaken by sobs. "Forgive me," she wept. "I didn't know. If I'd known." Kwame took her tear-bathed face between his hands. "You're not responsible for his crimes. You're his victim like me. I love you," she whispered breathlessly. "I love you too," he replied before kissing her passionately. Their lips found each other in urgency and fear, sealing a love born of pain but nourished by hope. Around them, Lagos continued its nightlife, indifferent to this kiss that changed everything. "The evidence," Kwame suddenly said, unscrewing his Akan pendant. 5 years I've carried this." The tiny USB key gleamed in his palm like a diamond of justice. Photos, recordings, testimonies, everything needed to send him to prison for life. "Raypower FM radio station," Aduni suggested. "My friend Kola works nights. He'll broadcast everything." They ran again through Lagos's streets, carried by adrenaline and hope for justice finally served. While they ran toward the radio station, Okafor called his political contacts from his armored Mercedes. In 6 hours, a private plane would take him to a country without extradition. But was 6 hours enough to silence the truth? Dawn broke over Lagos when Kwame's voice resonated through Raypower FM's speakers. Kola, Aduni's journalist friend, had agreed to broadcast all the evidence live. Photos of fraudulent constructions, compromising recordings, suppressed testimonies. Everything aired. In Mushin, Mama Kemi listened to the radio while preparing breakfast. When she heard her son's voice telling the truth, she dropped her spoon and ran into the street. "Come everyone! Kwame's speaking on the radio! Our Kwame is telling the truth!" Within minutes, the entire neighborhood gathered around radios. Akara sellers, mechanics, seamstresses, children heading to school, all listened with growing emotion to the story of this beggar who was actually the son of murdered architects. "We must support him," an old man shouted. "Okafor has crushed us too long." The message spread like wildfire. Thanks to mobile phones and social media, Kwame's story circled Lagos in an hour. On Facebook, Twitter, WhatsApp, evidence against Okafor circulated at lightning speed. Justice for Kwame became trending. Around noon, an immense crowd spontaneously gathered before Okafor Industries' glass towers in Victoria Island. They came from everywhere, from Mushin, Agege, Surulere, Ikeja. Poor and middle classes united in the same anger. Lagos's humble demanded justice. Mama Kemi walked at the head of the procession, carrying a sign. "Our children won't beg for your crumbs anymore." Behind her, thousands of voices chanted, "Truth, justice, truth, justice." Facing this human tide, Okafor understood his reign was ending. Barricaded in his office, he watched through the window this crowd demanding his head. The man who despised the poor all his life discovered their power when united. Police sirens wailed, but this time they weren't coming to disperse protesters. They were coming to arrest Okafor. Inspector Adebayo, an upright man who'd been investigating construction industry practices for months, pushed open the luxurious office door. Behind him, television cameras filmed every second. "Richard Okafor, you're under arrest for corruption, fraud, and complicity in murder." Lagos's most feared man was handcuffed before millions of Nigerian viewers. Ultimate poetic justice, the one who despised the people, was judged by them. "My lawyers," Okafor stammered. "Your bank accounts are frozen," the inspector cut in. "Your assets confiscated. Your accomplices arrested." Within hours, Okafor's empire crumbled like his defective constructions. 6 months later, Kwame stood before the mirror in his new Ikoyi house, adjusting his tie. The man who once begged in Lagos's streets had become again the architect he'd always been in soul. The Nigerian government had officially restored his diplomas and professional dignity. "You look magnificent," Aduni murmured, appearing in the doorway. She wore a traditional Yoruba wedding dress, embroidered with gold and Akan motifs honoring Kwame's Ghanaian origins. An orphan adopted by a criminal, she'd chosen to transform cursed legacy into force for good. With money legally recovered after Okafor's asset confiscation, she'd created the Asante Okafor Foundation for social housing construction. "Mama Kemi's waiting for you," she said, smiling. In the garden, their Hart family awaited. Mama Kemi, now official coordinator of community projects, wore her finest bubu. Mushin residents had come en masse to celebrate their Kwame's wedding. After the ceremony, everyone headed to Mushin's new residential complex. Unlike Okafor's cold concrete towers, these buildings harmoniously blended modern architecture with traditional motifs. Each apartment had running water, electricity, and was built to the strictest earthquake-resistant standards. Kwame spoke before the assembled community. His Akan pendant still gleamed at his neck, but it no longer carried vengeance's weight, only hopes. "A year ago, I sat on these sidewalks, hand extended," he said emotionally. "You fed me, protected me, loved me without asking anything in return. Today, we're building together our children's future." Mama Kemi wiped a tear of pride. Around them, Mushin's children played in the new complex's green spaces. Their laughter echoed like a promise of hope. "In a beggar's calloused hands hid the key to justice," Kwame concluded, looking at his community. "Because a people's true wealth lies in the courage of those the world refuses to see." Kwame's story reminds us of a universal truth. Human dignity isn't measured by material wealth, but by nobility of heart. In every society, anonymous Kwames silently carry injustice's weight, waiting for someone to recognize their value. This Nigerian story beautifully illustrates how love, solidarity, and courage can transform the humblest into agents of change. The real revolution begins when we stop judging people by appearances to discover their souls. If this story touched you, don't hesitate to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and activate the notification bell to not miss any of our inspiring stories. Also tell us in comments which city you're watching from, because these stories of hope cross all borders and unite hearts from the entire world.